Working over the years on the Fabrica with Dan was really a fascinating experience because although I didn't really work on it with him, every evening I got an update on what he had discovered or what he had struggled through. So I felt like I was really learning what he was learning as he untangled the Latin, and he'd come home with very interesting stories about how Vesalius managed to get a corpse to work on and that kind of thing. Another aspect that was particularly interesting was that I worked for an educational publisher, and just in the years before Dan began on the Fabrica, I had worked developing a series of anatomical physiological charts for elementary and secondary school children. So here I was, I felt like I'd been going to medical school, learning all these parts of the body and how they worked. And so when Dan came home and he said, well, Malcolm Hastas asked if I'd work with him on translating a Vesalius article on the hyoid bone, I knew exactly what he meant, which was a great pleasure to me. We finally had something we could talk about together because I know nothing about classics, the Catullus, the Virgil, the Horace. So finally we had something we both knew about. It was fun. No, I did not learn Latin, but I learned about the Renaissance Latin that Vesalius wrote as Dan would describe these complicated sentences that sometimes it took him a whole day to just translate one sentence. So I would hear about all the convolutions of the and elaborations of that period, which I guess was fairly typical, but very difficult to translate. So mercifully, I did not have to learn it. I just listened. Dan worked very intensively. He's one of those people who can focus on something so intensively that he is not distracted by anything. So he worked very intensively all those years. He had to interrupt himself to teach his classes, but in the last few years it's just been totally intensively. He can work hours and hours at a time. Working on the Fabrica changed Dan's outlook on the world immensely. He became so much more enthusiastic about what he was doing because it was new. He'd been teaching his classical literature for many years, and although he really enjoyed that, he didn't get the recognition for the kinds of work he did. He did a lot of books for teachers and students, which the university doesn't really acknowledge as highly valuable because it doesn't garner public attention, it doesn't get funding. So even though he enjoyed what he was doing, once he began working on the Fabrica and they got some funding from the National Institute of Health and the National Endowment for Humanities, suddenly the university was extremely pleased with him. And so that was good to suddenly get some recognition that was much deserved. But it was like having, becoming involved with the Fabrica was like a second career. It opened an entirely new world. And he began teaching courses he never would have imagined. I mean, teaching medical history, he never would have imagined doing that. And it was very exciting, very exciting. And going to different exhibits on anatomy in different cities, it's just a whole new world. So it really was like a whole new life. Very exciting. I think so, because he was I think the working on the Fabrica for over 20 years really changed our relationship because it was something that I was involved with from the beginning and saw how it was unfolding and opening up new doors. And because I'd had a little bit of background in anatomy and physiology myself, I was also really, really interested. So it was something we both enjoyed going to exhibitions and displays of different kinds, and hearing about how Vesalius managed to carve up something was very interesting. Another aspect was in our kitchen, because every time we had a piece of meat that had some bones or muscles, there was a big anatomy lesson going on about the way things were attached or fit one into the other. So it was a day-to-day Vesalius was with us. If I could meet Vesalius, I would ask him what the first thing was that he dissected and how old was he when he did that. Because I can just imagine him as a boy looking at different creatures and becoming very interested, and I'd like to know when he actually took a look inside. I think that would be very interesting to know.